Do you believe in magic? And I hope you do.
Since 1993, we've all been lucky enough to exist in a time where there's not one, but 4 amazing McDonald's games. Today, we're going to dive into each of those games and break down what makes them so incredible. And trust me when I say, the best is saved for last. Okay, I could be biased, so why don't you make up your own mind? Before we get into those, let's lay out a brief McDonald's history, which includes some very interesting and almost mean methods they use to keep people from staying in the restaurants too long. The first McDonald's opened on May 15, 1940. Located in San Bernardino, California, it was created by 2 brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald, but they went by Dick and Mac. The original McDonald's operated as a drive-in restaurant, which was a style of restaurant where you park, someone takes your order, and brings you your food. When they first opened, they offered barbecue food, so you know it was messy. But by 1948, they noticed that most people were coming in for their hamburgers. Yeah, it took them 8 years, but they narrowed it down and ended up creating a very simple menu with only 7 items: hamburgers, cheeseburgers, potato chips, coffee, ice cream, soft drinks, and apple pie. They also renovated to become a self-service drive-in restaurant, which basically meant you needed to park, get out of your car, come into the restaurant, and order your food. A couple years later, in 1952, they had replaced potato chips with French fries and decided it was time to upgrade. So they designed an Eden-style restaurant. This is also about the time when they adopted the iconic Golden Arches, thanks to the guidance of Ray Kroc. And they landed on a mascot. The original mascot was named Speedy, which was just some hamburger head dude in a chef's hat. He got his name from the Speedy service system the brothers introduced in 1948. According to the McDonald's wiki page, they had also come up with clever, if not almost torturous ways to get people to eat their food and just leave. They didn't want people just loitering around, so they kept the temperatures in the restaurants very cold. They minimized the heat usage so folks wouldn't get too comfortable. All the seating in the restaurant was angled toward the tables, so you couldn't lean back and relax. It was like sitting on a really slow slide that was pushing you towards your meal. They also kept each seat far enough apart to make it tough and almost awkward to talk to anyone. But the icing on the cake were the cone-shaped cups. Imagine yourself sitting on a weird slide chair that's got your chest bumping into the table you're attempting to eat at, and you have to hold your drink the entire time because you legit can't put it down without spilling it. If this is true, the food must have been amazing because this almost sounds like torture. I couldn't find any proof outside of the wiki though, so who knows? Truth or not, the business continued its success, and they began seeking franchisees. We all know it worked out, so let's jump to 1963. Why 1963? That's when the company introduced none other than Ronald McDonald. It did not go over very well initially. It turns out people are kinda scared of clowns, especially when they look like this. Yeah, that's the first Ronald. Who's trying to get a hamburger from this guy? They went back to the drawing board, and by 1966, with the help of circus performer named Coco the Clown, they revamped the look of Ronald McDonald and morphed him into the Ronald we all know and still have a healthy fear of. By 1971, the team wanted to expand the universe of Ronald by creating an entire new world called McDonaldland, full of new characters. This was the start of the McDonaldland campaign. We all remember Mayor McCheese, Ronald, that purple guy Grimace, Officer Big Mac, this super creepy Hamburglar, Professor, and the cute little Fry Kids. Okay, some of you probably don't remember all of them, and that's largely due to a lawsuit that occurred over the creation of the characters. That's a lot to unpack here, but maybe we can head down that road in a future video. It was thanks to the McDonaldland campaign that we ended up with 4 of the most random and groundbreaking video games of all time. The first game released on January 29th, 1988, and was only released in Japan for the Famicom. Developed and published by Data East, who is known for games like Burger Time, Rampage, and more. The designer who worked on the game was none other than Seiichi Ishii, who went on to design and direct the creation of Tekken and Tekken 2, among other games like Tobal No. 1, Urges, and The Bouncer. The composer was Shogo Sakai. This was his first game, but he went on to make music for Nintendo games while working at HAL Laboratory. He was the sole composer for the entire soundtrack of Mother 3. And the game they created together was called Donald Land, which I can only guess was an incorrect translation because they introduced Ronald as Donald during the intro. So you play as Ronald McDonald, or maybe it's his brother Donald. The game is a platformer with the premise being that a bunch of Ronald's friends have been kidnapped by the Gummon tribe and brainwashed. They also turned all the cute little critters into ferocious creatures. But don't worry, Ronald is armed with a pocket full of apple bombs. You throw the apples in an arc, and throwing an apple while moving will cause you to throw it further. It inherits the inertia from movement, so you can be pretty precise with it once you get used to it. Pressing down will throw it at your feet. Regular enemies take one hit to kill, but their hitboxes aren't always very good. It almost seems like they disappear at times. The bosses take 6 hits. They all have a particular spot you need to hit with your apples to send them to their doom. Ronald's movement is pretty intuitive. You can run by holding down jump, but I will warn you, it makes Ronald very slippery and will most likely cause you to fall off platforms. So I suggest using it sparingly. You can also jump on enemies and it won't hurt you, which can help you get to items you might not be able to reach on your own. But my favorite part of the game are the movement mechanics. Your jump is a variable height, so the longer you press jump, the higher you jump. When you walk across an apple then jump, it gives you a boosted jump. You can even throw an apple, then jump off of it while it's in the air. The speedrun really abuses this mechanic. In fact, they do it in a way that causes the screen to scroll so quickly that the game can't keep up with drawing the level. It's kinda wild. Between stages, you'll visit a McDonald's where you can purchase food. There are 2 menus. Buying food allows you to play a minigame where you attempt to find all the Ronald cards. If the card you selected is a Hamburglar card, that round is over. There are different prizes depending on how many Ronalds you find during the round, with 3 being the maximum. The other menu allows you to just buy the items you would win. They do cost more, but you know exactly what you're getting for your hard-earned hamburger monies you've been gathering throughout the level. The bomb gives you the ability to throw 2 bombs. The heart refills a health bar, and the Ronald face is an extra life. Each area will end in a boss. Once you defeat them, you'll free one of your friends from their evil clutches. I'm sure you've already noticed, but all the sprite work in this game is incredible. From cute clouds to trees with faces and even giant bosses. The enemies are kind of all over the place. It almost feels like the developers had unused sprites laying around and just threw them in. Like these Bonanza Bros looking dudes. You'll also encounter birds with top hats, flying whales, floating cats, whatever this thing is, and many more bizarre enemies. The game does a lot of fun little visual things, like this moon in the background while you're running through an evil castle. It's subtle, but a nice touch. The art style overall kinda reminds me of a more cute version of Monster Party in all the best ways. The game has 12 levels, which even include a balloon level. And of course, a water level. The swimming is fine, but sometimes you get caught in terrain and you have to mash a bunch to eventually remove yourself. For 1988, this game did a bunch of really cool things and it's actually super fun. But as is the case with most NES games, it's not easy. You do have a continue option, but they are limited. I'm not sure how many you get because the game doesn't tell you, but eventually I was met with a game over screen and had to start from the beginning. I'm curious how many people outside of Japan have played this game, or even heard of it for that matter. The second game released for the McDonald Land campaign was a bit more popular and was released in 1992. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be pronounced Mick Kids or MC Kids. I've always called it Mick Kids, but I'm just now noticing the periods between the M and the C. Whatever, I'm still calling it Mick Kids. Developed and published by Virgin Games, you know, the folks who were responsible for gems like Cool Spot and Aladdin. The good one? The one that lets you use a sword? Mick Kids released on the NES on February of 1992. And surprise, it's another platformer. The wiki page for the game says the NES version was created by 4 people in just 8 months. Darren Bartlett did the art and level design. Greg Is Tavares and Dan Chang worked on programming. And Charles Deenan worked on the audio. But there are other people listed in the credits. Either way, it was a very small team, and what they managed to do in that tiny amount of time is nothing short of impressive. The game can be played with 1 or 2 players. The 2-player option will see you alternating, kind of like a Mario Brothers game. If you decide to play solo, you can actually select which character you want to play as. Simply bonk your head on this block to swap between them. There are no gameplay differences between them, it's simply a palette swap, but it's really cool. The game opens with a cute cutscene of 2 playable characters, Mick and Mac, reading a book with their dead eyes. Why are their eyes so dead looking? Pupils would have gone a long way here. The story is about Ronald showing off his magic bag at a picnic. When out of nowhere, Ronald shows up at the kid's house screaming for help. Apparently the Hamburglar doesn't only steal burgers, because this time he's taken off with Ronald's magic bag. Ronald asks Mick and Mac to help get the bag back. The kids are tasked with finding at least 4 puzzle cards, and when they do, Ronald will gladly point them in the direction of Birdie's house. I have a lot of questions at this point. I'm not even sure I want to go to Birdie's house, but I guess we'll listen. Once you gain control of your character, you're greeted with a simplified Super Mario Bros. 3 style world map. There are 6 levels and 6 hidden puzzle cards to locate. You only need 4 to proceed to the next area, so what are the other 2 for? We'll get to that, and trust me, it's pretty dope. When you enter a stage, the game becomes a pretty standard platformer, with some fun added abilities. When you see these transparent blocks floating, that means there's a block you can locate within the level to place inside of the frame. Doing so will allow you to jump on top of the block and reach new areas. Blocks can also be thrown at enemies to defeat them. The bounce kind of reminds me of Super Mario 2. You can clearly see the Super Mario 3 inspirations in the stage graphics as well. My favorite part and the thing that caught me off guard are these gears. When you run into them, you flip upside down and reverse gravity, which kind of feels like a nod to Rad Gravity. Overall, the controls are really tight. Throughout the levels, you'll also find these springy mushroom thingies you can bounce off of. If you hold a block, it will give you more weight and allow you to bounce higher. As you run through the levels, you'll collect arches, and they work the same way coins do in Mario games. Collect 100 and you'll get an extra life. The stages end with a weird rope thing that has an M on it floating back and forth. Jumping on the M sends it flying to the left, and the further right it is, the more bonus arches you get. The hidden cards in the levels are these blocks with the M on them. You pick them up the same way as picking up any block. As cards are collected, you'll slowly reveal an image in the right-hand corner. This helps keep track of how many are left to find within that world. Sometimes you'll find these zippers within a level. Standing in front of them and pressing B will bring you to a challenge stage. These stages usually just contain things like arches and extra lives, but they're a fun little change of pace and such a great idea. While in these bonus stages, you'll want to avoid touching these blocks until you're done with the section, because doing so will send you back to the entrance. This style of block can also be encountered in regular levels, and they're used to progress or find secrets. Collecting 100 arches will not only get you an extra life, but when you finish the stage, you'll be met with a bonus stage. These levels have 4 blocks. An up arrow will appear on one of them. Landing on the up arrow block will move you toward the goal. When you reach the top, there will be a zipper door. When you enter it, you'll be able to try and grab as many 1-ups as you can until you fall. If you plan it out correctly, you should be able to grab all of them. Once you've located at least 4 puzzle cards, you can head back to Ronald's house and show him the fruits of your labor. He then sends you off to Birdie's house in the clouds, but don't worry. If you missed cards in the previous area, you can always go back, and trust me, you'll want to. The game continues this same formula, with each area being visually unique and presenting new mechanics and new enemies. Some of them are kinda random in all the best ways. But my favorite location is the moon. Yeah, eventually you take a rocket to the moon because why not? The surface is very moon-like, but later levels have you inside of the moon, and the stages are made of cheese. It's such a cute little touch, and I found it incredibly charming. Once you've located a secret puzzle card, you can head back to Ronald and he'll introduce you to Puzzle World. This is a land with 3 extra difficult stages, and they're all puzzle stages. Think of it as an early Celeste game. But to play these, you'll have to locate all 6 secret puzzle cards. Originally, the developers planned for you to be able to earn infinite lives by completing these 3 puzzle stages, but it turns out that the mechanics are broken. If you do want to try to get the unlimited lives, what you'll need to do is collect all 100 M's in each puzzle stage. But if you finish the stage, there's a glitch in the development that it doesn't unlock, so what you need to do is collect all 100 M's and then die. Doing so will actually unlock the flag for that level. And if you do that for all 3 puzzle stages, you can head to Ronald and he'll give you infinite lives. When I found out about these puzzle stages, my mind was blown. Sure, the devs took a lot of inspiration from Mario games, but they added so much more, and they really pushed the boundaries of games for that time. I feel like they could have released a sequel that was only these stages, and it would have been amazing. The final area has you confronting Hamburglar, who just respawns with a bunch of gibberish. This area is also home to the obligatory fire and lava stages. The game ends with you having to fight the magic bag you've been trying to rescue. First, it attacks with magic scarves, and it flies around shooting magic at you. And lastly, it sends a rabbit in a hat with a monocle or bulging eye. Once the bag is defeated, you'll pick it up and return it to Ronald. He claims to have learned his lesson about where to use the magic bag, but he also says he's ready for another picnic, so only time will tell. The game also went on to be released on Game Boy, Amiga, and Commodore 64, with some major visual differences across all releases. I personally think the Amiga version has the best updated visuals, but which do you like most? I mean, look at those sunglasses. Too cool. The next game to be released was a spiritual successor to Mick Kids, and also released in 1992. Mick and Mac as the Global Gladiators was developed by Virgin Games for the Sega Genesis. Virgin signed a contract with McDonald's that promised they would create a game in just 6 months. Either everyone in-house was stuck on other projects, or they didn't think they were up to the task, because Virgin reached out to David Perry, who at the time was a programmer for Probe Software. Perry had recently finished up work on the Terminator game for Genesis, so they were confident he could do what was needed. The full development team consisted of Mike Dietz on animation, Christian Larson on background art, and Tommy Tallarico creating the music. David Bishop was the designer on the project, and Bill Anderson designed the levels. Even though this was supposed to be a McDonald's game, there really isn't much in the way of branding. In fact, according to the wiki page, McDonald's executives were not too pleased to find out how little the game actually had to do with McDonald's. When David was approached about the lack of branding, he allegedly responded with, "No one likes Ronald McDonald and nobody wants restaurants in the game." But I could only find that info on the wiki page and a couple other pages that simply copy-pasted the wiki info. The game starts with Mick and Mac at a McDonald's restaurant. Once again, they're reading, but this time they have pupils. And this time, it's a comic book, called Global Gladiators. The kids express how cool it would be to be a gladiator. Then Ronald teleports in out of nowhere thanks to his magical stardust powers and kidnaps the kids by sprinkling some magic on them, which sends them into the comic. The game is a single-player platformer where you're armed with a weapon that looks an awful lot like a super soaker. You shoot what I can only guess is orange juice. Unlimited orange juice was a menu item at McDonald's in the early days. This time the kids are tasked with cleaning up the planet. There are 4 worlds that are in need of some help. Those being Slime World, Mystical Forest, Toxie Town, and Arctic World. Each world has multiple stages. To clear the stages, you must collect at least 30 golden arches, then meet up with Ronald. If you collect 75 or more arches in the stage, you can also play a bonus game where trash falls from the sky and you have to place it in the proper recycling bin. There's only one boss in the game, that being on the last stage where you have to fight 2 giant faces. Once you defeat the bosses, the kids are returned to the restaurant where Ronald is waiting. The kids ask if their experience was real life, to which Ronald simply says, "Maybe." It looks like they may have had hopes to create a second game because they allude to the next issue, but sadly, this never happened. The game was also ported to the Master System, Game Gear, and Amiga. There are rumored to be Game Boy and Super Nintendo prototypes floating around, but the game never released due to licensing issues. Overall, the game controls really well and it's not that long, so if you haven't played it, I suggest giving it a shot. There's a reason it's still so highly rated. The last game to be released for the McDonald Land campaign was another Sega Genesis game. But this time, it was created by one of the greatest game developers of all time. A man named Masato Maegawa was working for Konami as a programmer and developer. He and his team worked on games like The Simpsons arcade game and Super Castlevania, among other titles. In 1991, Maegawa was becoming frustrated with the way the company was going. He didn't want to continue making sequels for existing games. He felt people wanted original ideas. So Maegawa and a handful of other Konami employees started working on an original game and presented the idea to Konami. The company rejected the idea, but this was the push Maegawa needed. Maegawa left Konami and took some employees with him, and on June 19, 1992, they formed Treasure Inc. Even though the team had been developing games for the Super Nintendo, they wanted their new game to be on the Sega Genesis, because the Genesis ran on a Motorola 6800 microprocessor,
What's free? What Nintendo?
which turned out to be necessary to get the visuals and gameplay they wanted. They reached out to Sega to shop their latest creation, but Sega wasn't sure about them yet since they were technically a new developer and didn't have any reputation in the industry yet. Instead, Sega offered the team the opportunity to work on a McDonald's game for the McDonald Land marketing campaign. Treasure accepted and started work on what would eventually become the greatest McDonald's game ever. They also kept working on their original idea while working on the McDonald's game. They even finished the McDonald's game first, but the team wanted their first release as a new studio to be a 100% original game, so they delayed the McDonald's game slightly in order to release the game Konami had denied. That original game was Gunstar Heroes, and it was released on September 10th, 1993. Just 10 days later, on September 23rd of 93, they released McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure. The game released first in Japan and didn't release until December of 93 in the US. The game's story starts with Ronald walking through a magical forest when he finds a piece of paper under a tree. It looks like a treasure map. This makes Ronald want to find the rest of the map so he can go treasure hunting. In the game, you control Ronald McDonald as he adventures through 4 different worlds: Magical Forest, Magical Town, Magical Sea, and Magical Moon. That's right, we're going back to the moon. Each world has 3 stages. Ronald can shoot sparkles to defeat his foes, and he has a scarf that he uses to climb things. While running around, you collect bags of gold. These are used to purchase items from McDonald's stores. The items available are additional jewels, which extends Ronald's health, power-ups to increase the strength of your sparkles, and balloons that can help you fly out of danger. The team came up with a ton of ideas for enemy types, but wanted to make sure they fit the world of McDonald Land. So we ended up with some interesting and cute creatures, like this thing that kind of reminds me of a Furby. Finding one of these doors in a level will bring you to a bonus game. It costs you 2,000 gold to play, and it's basically a columns clone. As you play, you'll want to match up 3 of the same symbols. It can even be matched diagonally. Every time you make a match, it will add one of that symbol to the left. When you have completed 3 of the same matches, you'll get that item. The skulls are there for filler. You can't get rid of them, so eventually you'll fill the screen up and the round will be over. If you're familiar with treasure games, you'll probably notice this game seems to have inspired some of their later original games. A ton of this game feels very much like an early Dynamite Headdy, and the sprite work is all very treasure in the best ways. The last stage of each world will end with a boss. The last stages will also have one of Ronald's friends somewhere along the way. The first one you run into is Hamburglar, who gives you a hint on how to defeat the bosses, but he's not giving it up for free. You'll have to give him gems for the info. The trick for every boss is to allow them to steal one of your gems, and when they do, you can damage them. Each time you find one of the characters, they will ask for gems for whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Like Birdie here, who's trapped inside and needs gems to break out. It kind of felt like a scam because as soon as I handed over the gems, she just exited through the front door and flew away. And isn't Birdie a bird? Yet she requires balloons to assist in flight. I don't know, maybe she ate too many hamburgers. You'll also run into Grimace and this guy who looks like he escaped from a Zelda game. Oh, he was holding the Fry Guys captive. The boss sprites and fights are very treasure as well. The first boss is a giant pumpkin with a Vector Man body. The second is some sort of alien spacecraft with a face, hands, and a scorpion tail thing because why not? Then you fight a set of giant lips that's dressed as a pirate. And lastly, a lizard thing with a wand. After each boss, you'll get a cute cutscene. The sprite work in this game is way better than it has any right to be, but hey, that's treasure for you. But more importantly, after each boss, you'll get another piece of the treasure map. After the third boss, Ronald will now have a completed map, which suddenly transforms into a map of the moon. So they head to the professor for help. The professor builds you a rocket incredibly quickly. Then Ronald and friends jump in. Ronald, having never flown a rocket before, ends up crash landing on the moon. So the group splits up to look for help. Eventually, Ronald beats up this alien lizard thing, and the lizard helps by sending Ronald and friends back to Earth on a giant rainbow slide. If all those words aren't enough to make you want to play this game, then I can't help you. Just know that you're missing out. Eventually, other McDonald's games did release, like McDonald Land PC games, which had 6 games on it. But after Treasure Land Adventure, the games released were just sad attempts at cashing in on a license. I'm clearly biased because Treasure's my favorite developer, but which game do you think was the best?
Sonic 2 handles stubborn stains, embarrassing bald spots, no problem. It even slices and dices, makes thousands of julienne fries. But wait, you can play it too.